The coconut did not simply feed islands. In some places, it decided who lived long enough to build them. That sounds impossible, because most people see a coconut as beach scenery, a sweet drink, or a health trend in a glass bottle. It seems harmless, almost decorative, like nature's perfect snack already waiting on the sand. But that image is the first lie. The coconut is one of the few foods that can cross an ocean without a ship, survive saltwater, land on a beach, and begin changing human history before anyone touches it. And once people did touch it, the story became even stranger. Ancient sailors may have carried coconuts across impossible distances, not as cargo, but as survival equipment. Scientists later found clues in coconut DNA that pointed to two separate worlds, two ancient roots, and a mystery hidden inside the fruit itself. For a moment, the answer seems simple. Humans spread coconuts because coconuts helped humans survive. But then the facts stop behaving.
Coconuts appear in places where ocean currents make sense, and also in places where currents do not explain enough. They fed forgotten island societies, helped build trade networks, became oil for empires, and later turned into copra, a product so valuable that plantations reshaped lives across the tropics. The same tree that gave water, food, rope, fuel, shelter, and medicine also became tied to colonial pressure, forced labor, corporate profit, and a modern wellness industry selling old survival as new science. Even the health myth is not as simple as it looks, because the coconut has been called both a miracle food and a nutritional threat, depending on who was selling the story. So what is the coconut really? A gift from nature? A tool of empire? Or a quiet witness to one of humanity's greatest ocean mysteries? And if one ordinary tree helped humans conquer islands, survive isolation, and build hidden economies, what else has been hiding in plain sight above our heads? Subscribe, because the story inside this shell is much harder to believe than the world outside it. Most people believe the coconut is a fruit, but that belief falls apart the moment you look closer. Botanists don't fully agree on what a coconut even is because it behaves like three things at once. It acts like a fruit, it acts like a nut, and it acts like a seed. And technically, the correct answer is a drupe, the same category as a peach or a cherry. That already feels wrong because nothing about a coconut looks like a cherry. Yet the confusion goes deeper than science class. The word coconut itself comes from an old Portuguese and Spanish word, coco, which meant a grinning face or a little goblin. Sailors looked at the three dark spots on the shell, saw two eyes and a mouth, and named the thing after a monster used to scare children. So the tropical symbol of relaxation was originally named after a nightmare. And that small detail hints at how little we actually understand this plant. Here is where the calm explanation usually begins. People assume the coconut is simply a beach plant, something that grows near warm water because it likes sunshine and sand. That sounds reasonable, and for a long time it was the accepted story. But the coconut does not just grow near the ocean by accident. It is one of the only large seeds on Earth engineered by nature to travel across open sea. The thick husk most people throw away is not waste. It is a flotation device, filled with air pockets that let the seed float for weeks, sometimes months, without sinking. The hard shell protects the embryo inside, and the water sealed within is a private fresh water supply, so the seed can drink while it drifts across an ocean that would kill almost anything else. In other words, the coconut is not a beach decoration. It is a survival capsule built to colonize islands humans had never seen. And that leads to a much stranger idea. For centuries, people assumed humans planted coconuts everywhere they grew, but the ocean got there first. Coconuts were washing up on distant shores and sprouting into trees long before any sailor thought to carry one. This is why coconut palms appear on tiny remote islands that no human had ever settled. The plant was exploring the planet on its own, riding currents like a slow green fleet. But this is exactly where the simple story breaks down again, because the coconuts we eat today did not spread only by water. Somewhere along the way, humans took over the process. And they did it so thoroughly that scientists can still see their fingerprints inside the DNA of modern coconuts. That discovery is one of the most surprising twists in the whole story. When researchers studied coconut genetics from around the world, they expected one big family tree. Instead, they found two. There are two genetically distinct groups of coconuts, one from the Pacific side and one from the Indian Ocean side. And they are different enough that they clearly developed apart for thousands of years. The Pacific type tends to have that round, thick-husked, water-rich shape people picture instantly. The Indian Ocean type is often more elongated and was prized for its oil-rich flesh. These two lineages did not naturally blend because oceans and land masses kept them separated. So when scientists found beaches where the two types were mixed together, it meant something important had happened. It meant humans had physically carried coconuts from one ocean world into another. That single clue rewired the timeline of ancient travel. The places where the two coconut types blended line up with old trade routes, ancient sea paths, and the movements of some of the greatest sailors in history. The coconut became a kind of genetic map of human exploration, quietly recording where people went long before anyone wrote it down. Ancient Austronesian voyagers, some of the boldest ocean travelers who ever lived, appear to have carried coconuts across vast distances as they settled islands scattered like dust across the Pacific. To them, the coconut was not a snack. It was water, food, rope, oil, fuel, containers, and medicine, all packed inside one shell. A single tree could keep a small crew alive on a voyage into the unknown, which is why some cultures came to call it the Tree of Life without any exaggeration at all. But calling it the Tree of Life hides a darker truth that most people never think about. A food powerful enough to build civilizations is also powerful enough to control them. Anything that decides who eats, who trades, and who survives eventually decides who holds power. The same coconut that helped humans conquer the oceans would later pull them into competition, obsession, and conflict. The plant that quietly floated to freedom on ocean currents would one day be planted in endless rows by force, guarded like treasure, and fought over by empires that had never even seen a tropical shore. And the strangest part is that the coconut we argue about today, the one sold as a miracle in modern stores, is not really the same coconut those ancient sailors knew. Somewhere between the drifting seed and the bottled health product, the original story was quietly buried. So if the coconut was never just a fruit, and never just a beach plant, and never even spread the way we were taught, then the real question becomes impossible to ignore. Who first looked at this floating monster-faced seed, cracked it open, and realized it was powerful enough to carry an entire civilization across the sea? To understand the coconut, you first have to understand that nobody is completely sure where it came from. Most foods leave a clear trail, a single homeland, a first farm, a starting point on the map. The coconut refuses to cooperate. Scientists have argued for over a century about its true origin, and even now the answer sits somewhere between two oceans and a lot of educated guessing. What they do agree on is strange enough. The coconut we know today did not appear in one place and slowly spread outward like most crops. Instead, it seems to have two ancient homelands,
separated by thousands of miles of open water, as if the fruit was born twice. The evidence for this came from genetics, not history books. When researchers studied coconut DNA from around the world, they found two distinct genetic groups. One traces back to the region around India and the Indian Ocean. The other traces back to Southeast Asia and the Pacific.
These two populations are so different that they clearly developed apart for a very long time. That alone was surprising, but the deeper mystery was how they later mixed. In certain places, the two lineages blended together, and those blended coconuts often appeared exactly where ancient trade and travel routes crossed. In other words, the coconut carried a hidden record of human movement inside its own genes. That record points to something people rarely think about. The coconut is one of the greatest natural travelers in the plant world. Its thick husk lets it float, and it can survive in seawater for weeks, sometimes months, drifting with the currents until it washes onto a distant shore. When it lands, it can sprout on its own, needing almost nothing to start growing. This is why early scientists assumed the ocean did all the work, quietly planting coconuts across the tropics without any human help. It is a clean, simple explanation, and for a while it seemed to settle everything. Then the facts started fighting back. If the ocean alone spread coconuts, the fruit should appear mostly where currents naturally push floating objects. But coconuts show up in places the currents do not easily explain, and they are often the exact, useful, easy-to-grow varieties that people would want to carry. A wild coconut left entirely to nature tends to look different from the ones humans depend on. The most valuable types, with more water and better flesh, cluster suspiciously close to old human settlements and sailing routes. Nature can move a coconut, but it does not choose the best ones on purpose. People do. This is where the coconut stops being a passive drifter and becomes something closer to ancient equipment. For early ocean-going people, especially the seafarers of the Pacific, the coconut was almost a survival kit disguised as a fruit. The water inside a young coconut is clean and safe to drink, which mattered enormously on long voyages where fresh water could run out. The flesh gave food, the oil gave fuel and skin protection, the husk fibers became rope, and the shells became cups and containers. A boat stocked with coconuts was a boat that could travel farther and survive longer. It is entirely possible that some of the most daring ocean journeys in human history were only possible because of this one plant. The people who mastered these voyages settled islands scattered across an area larger than any empire on land. They crossed enormous stretches of open Pacific and arrived on tiny specks of land in the middle of nowhere. On many of those islands, the coconut was already useful, and where it was missing, it seems humans brought it and planted it deliberately. Over generations, the coconut became the backbone of island life, the reason a small piece of land could support a whole community. In many of these cultures, the tree earned names that translate to ideas like the tree of life, not as a poetic compliment, but as a plain description of the truth. Losing your coconut trees could mean losing everything. What makes this even stranger is how many uses these societies squeezed out of a single plant. The trunk became building material. The leaves became roofs and mats and baskets. The sap could be turned into sweet drinks or fermented into something stronger. And even the roots found use in traditional medicine. Very few plants on Earth can feed you, hydrate you, house you, and equip you all at once. The coconut could do all of it, which is exactly why entire ways of life were built around a single species. When one plant becomes that important, it stops being food and starts shaping the culture, the economy, and even the survival strategy of the people who rely on it. And yet, for all this usefulness,
the biggest question was still hiding underneath.
Because if the coconut has two separate ancient homelands, and if humans carried the best varieties along their oldest roots, then the coconut is not just a fruit that spread across the world. It is a living map of forgotten journeys, ancient contact, and connections between distant peoples that history has struggled to explain. The genes suggest that groups who supposedly never met may have somehow exchanged coconuts long ago, in ways that do not fit the neat timelines we were taught. Nobody has fully solved how those two coconut worlds came together, or who exactly carried them across that impossible gap of ocean. Once the coconut proved it could survive an ocean, it stopped being just food and started becoming money. Somewhere along the ancient trade routes of the Indian Ocean, sailors realized this single tree could power an entire journey. They didn't just eat the flesh and drink the water.
They twisted the rough fiber around the shell into rope, and that rope quietly changed shipbuilding forever. This fiber, called coir, was strong, cheap, and it did something almost no other rope could do. It could sit in salt water for months and refuse to rot. Whole fleets were stitched together without a single nail, using nothing but coconut rope tying the wooden planks in place. This is where the coconut slips into a bigger story than most people expect. Arab and Indian traders were binding their ships with coir long before European sailors trusted the idea. Some early travelers were shocked to see large vessels held together by nothing but knotted plant fiber. It looked fragile to them, almost like a trick. But those fragile ships were crossing open water and carrying spices, cloth, and secrets between distant ports. The coconut wasn't just riding on trade routes anymore. It was literally holding the ships of the trade routes together. And the fiber was only the beginning of the coconut's hidden value. As these routes grew busier, people discovered that dried coconut flesh could be pressed for oil. That oil burned clean in lamps, softened skin, cooked food, and lasted far longer than the fresh fruit ever could. Suddenly, a food that rotted quickly had a version that could be stored, shipped, and sold across the world. The coconut had found a way to travel not just as a nut, but as a product with a long life and a rising price. That single change quietly rewired the destiny of entire coastlines. Villages that once used coconuts only for survival began drying the flesh on purpose to sell it. This dried flesh had a name that would later haunt millions of lives. It was called copra, and copra was about to become one of the most valuable tropical goods on Earth. What started as leftover food drying in the sun was turning into an export that empires would soon fight to control. Religion traveled these same routes, and the coconut traveled with it. As traders and pilgrims moved between ports, the fruit spread into new cultures that gave it new meaning. In parts of South Asia, the coconut became sacred, cracked open in temples as an offering to the gods. The clean white flesh looked pure, and the water inside seemed almost like a gift sealed by nature. A food that started as pure survival was slowly turning into a symbol of blessing, luck, and even sacrifice. But while priests were blessing coconuts, merchants were counting them. European powers arriving in the tropics quickly noticed something the locals had always known. This one tree produced food, drink, oil, rope, fuel, and building material from a single trunk. To empire builders, that wasn't a miracle of nature. It was an opportunity for profit. They didn't see a tree of life. They saw a cash crop waiting to be scaled far beyond anything the islands had ever done on their own. That shift in thinking changed everything about how coconuts were grown. For most of history, coconut trees grew scattered near homes and along shorelines, feeding families and small communities. Empires wanted something very different. They wanted straight rows, huge plantations, and thousands of trees planted for one purpose only, which was to feed the oil and copra trade. The friendly backyard tree was being turned into an industrial machine, and the people living near it were about to feel the weight of that decision. Here, the story takes a darker turn that most viewers never connect to coconuts. To run these massive plantations, colonial powers needed cheap labor, and lots of it. Workers were moved, pressured, and sometimes shipped across oceans to plant and harvest coconuts far from home. The same fruit that once helped islanders live freely was now tied to systems of control and forced work. The tree of life had quietly become a tree of profit. And the profit did not flow to the people climbing the trunks. The demand behind all of this came from an unexpected place. Back in the growing cities of the industrial world, coconut oil was becoming a hidden ingredient in everyday life. It went into soap, candles, and later into processed foods, without most buyers ever knowing where it came from. Far away, a farmer was drying copra under the sun, and somewhere in a distant city, that same coconut was turning into a bar of soap in a stranger's hands. The two worlds were completely connected, yet almost no one saw the link. One shift in the wider world could send shockwaves straight back to the coconut coast. When wars disrupted other sources of fats and oils, coconut oil suddenly became even more important. When new machines needed lubricants and clean-burning fuels, coconut oil found fresh demand again. The price of copra could rise and fall based on events happening thousands of miles away, in places that had never seen a coconut tree. Island economies were now tied to decisions made in foreign capitals and distant markets. And then came the twist that truly locked the coconut into global history. Copra became so valuable that entire island groups were pushed to plant coconuts above almost everything else. Some communities began depending on a single crop to buy the goods they no longer produced themselves. When copra prices were high, life felt rich and full of promise. When those prices crashed, whole islands suffered for reasons they could not control and did not fully understand. That dependence created a strange kind of trap hidden inside a gift. The coconut had once made islands independent, feeding people who needed nothing from the outside world. Now the same tree was pulling those islands into a global economy that could reward them or ruin them without warning. The fruit that symbolized freedom and survival had quietly become a leash tied to faraway buyers and shifting prices. By the time the world truly understood how deep this went, the coconut had already reshaped coastlines, labor, religion, and trade across the tropics. One historical shift, the moment people realized dried flesh could be turned into oil and sold forever, had changed the destiny of this fruit completely. It was no longer just the tree that fed entire islands. It had become the tree that empires learned to harvest. And the story of who truly controlled that harvest was about to turn far uglier than anyone expected. For most of its history, the coconut was seen as a gift, but slowly it became a target of greed. And the thing that turned it from survival food into big business was not the fruit itself, but a dried version of it called copra. Copra is simply the white flesh of the coconut, cut out and dried until it becomes hard and oily.
That dried meat could be squeezed to release coconut oil, and that oil was suddenly worth a fortune. It could burn in lamps, grease machines, make soap, and later feed the growing appetite of European factories. So the humble coconut, once used to keep island families alive, became one of the most valuable tropical products in the world. And wherever a plant becomes that valuable, human history usually takes a darker turn. Once coconut oil became profitable, powerful companies and empires wanted to control the supply. Tropical coastlines that had fed local people for centuries
were suddenly measured in tons of copra. Islands that had lived quietly for generations were pulled into a trading system they never asked to join. Foreign traders arrived, promising money, tools, and progress. But what they really wanted was land covered in coconut trees. Over time, ordinary island communities lost control of the very plant that had always defined them. The tree of life was quietly becoming the tree of profit, and the people living beneath it were rarely the ones getting rich. To grow copra on a massive scale, plantation owners needed workers, and this is where the story turns genuinely dark. Across the Pacific, thousands of islanders were pulled into brutal labor systems to feed the coconut trade. Some were tricked, some were pressured, and some were simply taken. This practice of capturing or deceiving island workers even earned its own chilling nickname, blackbirding. Men were carried far from their home islands to cut, dry, and process coconuts on plantations they would never own. Families were broken apart so that distant factories could keep their machines running smoothly. The sweet water inside a coconut had once meant survival, but the oil inside it now meant control. While islanders suffered, coconut oil was quietly conquering the modern world in ways almost nobody noticed.
It slipped into soap, candles, and cheap lamp fuel long before electricity was common. It became a hidden ingredient in early processed foods and industrial products across Europe and America. For a while, coconut oil was one of the most important fats on the planet, powering both kitchens and factories. Then came a twist that almost destroyed the entire industry. And it did not come from a war. It came from a laboratory and a marketing war over what kind of fat people should eat. In the 20th century, new vegetable oils appeared, especially those made from soybeans and corn grown in huge amounts. These industries needed to win space on kitchen shelves, and coconut oil was standing directly in their way. Slowly, a powerful message spread that coconut oil was dangerous because it was full of saturated fat. People were told this tropical oil could clog arteries and damage the heart. Almost overnight, a food that had kept entire islands healthy for thousands of years was labeled a silent killer. What most people never realized was how much money was involved in shaping that fear. Behind the scenes, competing oil industries had every reason to make coconut oil look unhealthy. If shoppers believed coconut oil was dangerous, they would naturally buy cheaper local vegetable oils instead. Health messages and business interests became tangled together in ways that were almost impossible to separate. Scientists, companies, and advertisers all played a role in reshaping what people believed about fat. The coconut did not change at all, but the story told about it changed completely. And that is one of the strangest truths in food history. Sometimes a food's reputation has almost nothing to do with the food. The damage to coconut farming was very real, even if the science was messy and incomplete. Demand dropped in wealthy countries, and many tropical growers watched their main product lose value. Entire regions that depended on copra suddenly faced falling prices and shrinking markets. Some plantations were abandoned, and traditional knowledge about coconuts began to fade. A plant that had survived oceans, empires, and centuries of use was nearly defeated by a rumor. But the coconut had one more surprise waiting, because reputations in the food world rarely stay dead forever. Even as the health scare spread, coconuts were quietly causing other problems that had nothing to do with diet. Their heavy fruit falling from tall trees created real dangers in busy tropical areas. Old fears about falling coconuts eventually turned into wild, exaggerated safety claims and strange warnings. Some tourist areas even removed or trimmed trees, worried more about lawsuits than tradition. So the same fruit that once symbolized paradise slowly became something to fear from every direction. It was blamed for bad hearts, dangerous beaches, and messy plantations all at once. Yet underneath all these scandals, something important was being ignored about the coconut. The plant was still feeding millions of people who had no interest in health trends or trade wars. In many communities, it remained food, medicine, building material, and income all at the same time. The global arguments about fat and profit barely touched the daily reality of coconut life. And that gap between the real coconut and the marketed coconut was about to explode in a completely unexpected way. Because the same oil once called a silent killer was quietly preparing to return as a so-called miracle. For a long time, coconut oil was just something people made by hand near the shore, slowly and in small amounts. Families dried the white flesh, pressed it, and used the oil for cooking, lamps, and skin. Nobody imagined this quiet island product would soon feed factories on the other side of the planet. But when industrial machines arrived, everything about the coconut changed almost overnight. Companies realized that dried coconut meat, called copra, could be shipped across oceans and pressed into oil in massive quantities far from where it grew. Suddenly, a food that once fed a single village became raw material for a global machine. And the coconut stopped belonging to the islands that raised it. The strange part is what that oil was actually used for once it reached the factories. Most people assume coconut oil went straight into food, but in the early industrial years, it disappeared into soap, candles, and machine grease instead. Coconut oil turned out to be perfect for making hard, clean soap that lathered well. So entire soap empires quietly depended on tropical trees. The same oil that families once burned in small lamps was now lighting cities and washing the hands of people who had never seen a coconut tree. And this hidden demand created a race, because whoever controlled copra controlled a resource the modern world suddenly could not live without. Then, chemistry entered the story and changed the coconut again. Scientists learned how to break coconut oil apart and rebuild it into new products that looked nothing like the original. They turned it into margarine, into cooking fats, and into ingredients hidden inside foods that never mention coconut on the label. For decades, coconut oil sat invisibly inside cookies, crackers, and cheap baked goods sold in countries far from the tropics. People were eating coconut every day without knowing it, while believing coconut was something exotic and rare. That gap between what people believed and what they actually consumed became the perfect space for marketing to grow. Marketing is where the coconut story takes its sharpest turn. For much of the 20th century, coconut oil was attacked as one of the most dangerous fats a person could eat.
It was called artery clogging, unhealthy, and something modern people should avoid completely. A powerful campaign, quietly backed by competing vegetable oil industries, helped push coconut oil out of American kitchens almost entirely. Restaurants that once fried food in coconut oil switched to other oils under public pressure. The tropical fat that had fed islands for thousands of years was suddenly treated like a villain, and few people questioned who benefited from that fear. But here is the twist that almost nobody expected. Decades later, the very same coconut oil was reintroduced to the world as a miracle health food. Marketing that once destroyed its reputation now rebuilt it into something sacred. Bottles appeared on store shelves promising weight loss, better brains, glowing skin, and natural energy. The price climbed, the packaging turned elegant, and coconut oil became a symbol of clean living for people who had never distrusted it in the first place. The same product, the same fat, and the same tree were sold twice. First as a danger, and then as a cure. What makes this reinvention so surprising is how little the science truly changed underneath the marketing. Coconut oil did not suddenly transform its chemistry between being hated and being loved. The story changed, the mood changed, and the industry found a new way to sell an old product. Wellness brands leaned on words like natural and traditional, even though the modern coconut oil boom was one of the most industrial and carefully marketed food trends ever created. A survival food from remote islands had been repackaged as luxury for wealthy customers. The coconut water in your hand went through the exact same reinvention. For most of history, coconut water was simply the drink inside the nut, something ordinary and free to anyone with a tree. Then companies bottled it, shipped it, and rebranded it as a natural sports drink for a health-conscious world.
Athletes appeared in advertisements, and investors poured money into brands built entirely around a liquid that islanders had been drinking casually forever. A drink that once cost nothing became a booming global business worth staggering amounts of money, all through storytelling and clever branding. Behind these shining products, though, the reality of production stayed far less glamorous. Most of the world's coconuts still come from small farmers who earn very little for the fruit that fuels these massive industries. The workers who climb the trees and split the nuts rarely see the profits that flow toward distant companies and brands. Some regions even rely on harvesting methods and labor conditions that buyers prefer not to advertise. The gap between the peaceful tropical image and the hard economic truth remained as wide as ever, hidden neatly behind beautiful packaging. And this is where the coconut's modern myth begins to quietly crack open.
The wellness world sold coconut as timeless, pure, and simple. Yet everything about its modern life was engineered, marketed, and fought over. The trends that promised natural health were built on the same industrial machine that once turned coconut into soap and cheap fat. Every wave of popularity reshaped how people saw the fruit, while the tree itself stayed exactly the same. What changed was never the coconut, but the story people were willing to believe about it. And that raises a far more unsettling question about what is happening to the coconut right now, in a world that may be quietly running out of the very thing it learned to sell. For most of its life, the coconut was never treated as a health product. It was treated as survival, as rope, as fuel, as the thing that kept people alive when nothing else could. So the strangest twist in this entire story is how a plain tropical staple was reborn as a luxury wellness item sold in glass jars at premium prices. The coconut you buy today has been reshaped by marketing far more than by farming, and most people never notice the difference. In many tropical countries, coconut oil was once considered cheap, ordinary, and slightly embarrassing compared to imported fats. Families used it because it was available, not because they thought it was special. Then, Western food science entered the picture and turned that idea completely upside down over just a few decades. For years, coconut oil was attacked as one of the worst fats a person could eat, blamed for clogged arteries and heart disease in health campaigns. Doctors warned against it, food companies replaced it, and tropical producers watched their most important product get labeled as dangerous. What almost nobody realized was that a huge part of that fear came from studies using hydrogenated coconut oil, not the natural kind people actually cooked with.
The processing changed the fat. The changed fat looked harmful, and the whole plant took the blame for something factories had done to it.
That single scientific misunderstanding quietly damaged entire island economies that depended on coconut exports for survival. Then the story flipped again, and this time the swing was even more extreme than the first one. Suddenly, coconut oil became a miracle, a superfood, a natural cure for almost everything from weight loss to brain health. The same fat that was once called poison was now sold as medicine, and the price climbed with the hype. Wellness influencers claimed it burned fat, boosted energy, fought infections, and even protected the brain from aging. Some of these claims had a small scientific seed, usually involving a specific type of fat called medium-chain triglycerides. But most coconut oil on shelves does not contain nearly enough of that fat to create the dramatic effects being promised.
In other words, people were paying premium prices for benefits that mostly lived in the advertising, not in the jar. This is one of the biggest hidden truths of the modern coconut industry, and it is happening right now. The health war around coconut oil was never really about health. It was about who controlled the story and which fats companies wanted people to buy instead. When cheap seed oils needed to win market share, tropical fats were the enemy that had to be defeated. When natural and organic products became profitable, the coconut was pulled back out and crowned a hero again. The plant never changed at all, but the business around it kept rewriting its reputation to fit whoever was selling something. And while the world argued about oil, an even bigger shift was happening quietly in the water inside the shell. Coconut water, once a simple drink that islanders barely thought about, became a billion-dollar global industry almost overnight. Companies marketed it as nature's sports drink, a pure source of hydration and minerals straight from the tree. Huge beverage corporations bought up brands, poured in money, and turned a humble roadside refreshment into a lifestyle symbol. What most buyers never learned is that a lot of packaged coconut water is made from concentrate, not fresh from a young green nut. The romantic image of drinking straight from a coconut was sold worldwide, even as factories processed and shipped it like any other product. Behind that glossy branding sits a familiar pattern, the same one that follows the coconut through its entire history. A poor man's food becomes a rich man's trend, and the people who grew it rarely capture the biggest profits. Many coconut farmers today still earn shockingly little, even as their fruit sells for high prices in wealthy cities far away. A large share of the world's coconuts come from small farmers working aging trees that were planted generations ago. Those trees are now getting old. And this is where the story turns from marketing into a genuine crisis nobody talks about. An aging coconut tree produces fewer nuts, and replanting takes years before a new tree becomes truly productive. Millions of these trees are reaching the end of their most fertile years at almost the same time across the tropics. At the same time, plant diseases and pests have been quietly killing coconut palms across entire regions. One of the most feared threats is a disease that makes the tree's crown turn yellow and slowly collapse from the top down. There is no simple cure, and once it spreads through an area, it can wipe out huge numbers of trees. So the world now faces a strange contradiction that almost nobody sees coming. Global demand for coconut products keeps rising fast, while the trees that supply them are quietly aging and dying. The plant that once helped humans survive isolation may now struggle to survive human demand. Climate change adds another layer of pressure, since stronger storms and rising seas hit coastal coconut regions the hardest. The very shorelines that made the coconut famous are becoming more dangerous for the trees that grow there. And as old knowledge fades, traditional ways of using every part of the coconut are slowly disappearing too. In many places, the deep skill of turning one tree into food, rope, tools, and medicine is being forgotten. What survived thousands of years of oceans and empires is now threatened by supermarkets, shortcuts, and lost memory. The coconut that opened this story as beach scenery turns out to be something far more fragile and far more important. It fed islands, crossed oceans, built economies, survived scandal, and became a symbol sold back to the world at a markup. Yet the true mystery is no longer where the coconut came from, but whether it can survive what we are about to do to it. Because a food that once meant survival for isolated humans may now depend entirely on us
to survive at all.